Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@usaprepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class today. Jason's engineering the broadcast at Genesis Communications Network in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. I'm in Missouri for the moment. And if you'd like to call us, 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. You might want to write that number down because we're going to be discussing some things that you probably wanted to know about but really didn't want to know about because they're uncomfortable. Medical things that you might feel uncomfortable with. So if you're kind of squeamish, you can change the dial today. Hour number 1 is with Steve Elkins. Hour number 2 is me. Joey might call in, and we might be talking about all the wonderful attributes of Walmart. But for sure, I'm going to be talking about some of the tips I have from the book. That will be hour number 2. Steve Elkins is with us, nurse of 27-plus years experience. Welcome, Steve Elkins.
Hey, thank you, Vincent. I'm glad you got me for the first hour because I've got an interview with Walmart in my second hour. So,
do you
crossing
really?
My fingers. Crossing my fingers.
Do you really? Tell me about your interview with Walmart.
I'm kidding you.
Oh, okay. Well, because I was going to congratulate you because when you want to talk to the store manager, the answer is he's on vacation.
Yeah.
And my answer to that is, of course he is. He's always on vacation. Whether Joey's trying to talk to the store manager or I am, all you get is the assistant to the assistant to the assistant to the assistant to the assistant
and you
store
get
manager.
the manager. When you do get the manager, it's a 19-year-old kid with pimples on his face.
Right, right.
Yeah. Are you serious? You're a manager? Yeah, I'm the manager. Wow. Short supply of managers.
You know, I just as a tangential story. So I went to Menards. I was frosted. I bought 10 cases of distilled water. There's 3-gallon jugs. They're milk jugs, but distilled water in a cardboard box. Got them home, put them in a truck, got them home. So that's 30 gallons, and I use that for the solar system. And so I opened up one of these cardboard boxes, and one of the jugs is the box is wet, and one of the jugs doesn't have it's not full. And I looked, and I saw what it was. So there was a hole, a length about 1 inch, under the cap on the neck, where the neck meets the body of the jug. There was a slit in it.
Yep.
It wasn't a knife slit. It was just kind of like there was a failure of this jug. Opened some more cases. They were good. Our son opened one, another one. Was same kind of defect. So I brought them back with Mrs. Finelli, and I talked to one of the guys at the control tower. And he said, yeah, I know about it. I said, you do? He goes, yeah, when they handle these things with the forklift, they throw them on top of each other, and the neck gets crushed, and they break, and they leak. Yeah. And I said, so did you fire the guy? They said, oh, no, and this is their words. No, he probably got promoted. And I thought, so I said to this young guy at the control tower, I said, so is he store manager by now? And that's the way we think, because it is so miserable dealing with the big box stores, because the people who work there generally don't know much. So Menards
I thought you were going to say that it was from a box cutter knife, because I found that the stockers at all these stores, they don't read the boxes, and they just take those box cutters and slice here, slice there. Next thing they're slicing holes in everything. So I figured you were going to say it was a box cutter.
Well, yeah. That's the rest of the story. So the guy at the control tower said, "Oh yeah, that's nothing. That's nothing." There was this, middle-aged gal. She picked up one of those 3-jug cardboard boxes of water, picked it up, and there was a box cutter cut in the end of the box. So when she picked it up, the jug fell out, one of them, water went everywhere. Yeah. So I got to tell you, Steve, I used to have a job like that. Not exactly at a Menards or a Walmart, but I used to have a job when I was very young, and there's no way I would be that reckless nor that careless.
Yeah.
It would be an embarrassment.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you about a little experience I had. I kind of was second in command and running a liquor store during college. It worked with my school schedule. I could study at night sometimes when everything was stocked and the business was down. And I have to set up displays, and so I use a box cutter, and I'm always cutting boxes and to make these nice displays that are, basically saying, buy me, And so if you don't know what you're doing, you could destroy a lot of alcohol because not everything's in glass anymore. But you had to be very, very, keen in understanding that your box cutter, what's inside? Is it glass? Okay. Is it plastic? Are you going to be really more careful, take everything out, cut your boxes, then put them back in? But I find those people at Walmart, they're just going through so much merchandise and putting up displays, and they have no clue. They don't look down at the box and say, what's in this? They're just slice, and a lot of stuff's getting damaged and wasted. And you think that somebody in management would say, hey, you know what, we're losing a lot of merchandise because of this. And then you reach down and you say, you guys, look what you're doing here. You are destroying a lot of product. We're going to lose some money here. We're in the business of making money, not losing it. But, and then when you walk in the Walmart and you see the woman with pink hair, purple hair, green hair, and this is their hiring pool, I don't know what else to say. Walmart is not the same Walmart I remember 20, 30 years ago. Not at all. Not even close.
I agree. So, class, today, Steve and I, and you can too if you'd like to call in. I'm going to give you that number one more time. Not that we're begging for calls. That's not it. But when we get into this topic, you may have those burning questions that you're only going to get answered here. And when you hear about this, what we're going to talk about, you'll see why I'm saying this. So you may want to write this down. 866-582-9933. So the story goes like this. My dad was traveling on a 2-lane road, one way each way. A guy fell asleep at the wheel. Drove into my dad's lane. My dad had just filled up his pickup truck. And the guy was heading right toward my dad at 55 miles an hour. This was in Virginia. There was a bank on my dad's side. The bank was going uphill. My dad climbed the bank, and this guy hit him anyway, head on, 55 miles an hour each. So it was a 110-mile-an-hour crash. My dad was really banged up. His truck that he just filled up was on fire. A Good Samaritan somehow found the strength to pull him out of the door because the door was crushed. My dad ended up in the hospital, and he was treated by the same team that treated Christopher Reeves, Superman, when he had that horse accident. Same team. Intensive care, surgical trauma unit, 5 months or so in the hospital. Well, so we were used to sleeping at the hospital, literally, for months. We would not leave him alone because we want to know what was happening, what the injections were, who, what, when, where, why, and how. And there are a lot of things that you can learn from this, because if someone is in, let's say, an induced coma, they can get something called foot drop. And we'll have Steve tell you about that.
Oh, yeah.
So if the family doesn't realize that the person doesn't have something to keep his or her foot in the normal position, as if you're standing on your foot will drop and it won't work right after that. And that's a big problem. So we'll talk about foot drop, but we'll start out with a gut-wrenching discussion. And please, if you've got a weak stomach, please turn that dial. So maybe a decade later, my dad ended up in the hospital again. And we would visit him every day. My mom, Mrs. Finelli, the children, we'd all be there every day. My mom would stay there for days at a time and sleep in a chair. Literally. We'd bring her clothes and she'd stay there to monitor his health when Mrs. Finelli and the children and I couldn't be there. But we were there every day. And one of the days when we went home to get some sleep, we got that call. Your father is in the process of dying. If you'd like to see him, you need to get here right now. So I never asked this question of anybody until I asked Steve Elkins, who's a nurse of 27 years experience. And my question was, Steve, how do you know? How do you know? Because they were right. And I did, I don't know, over 100 miles an hour to get there. And I missed it. I missed it by just a couple of minutes. How did that nurse know that my dad was just about ready to go? How did she know?
My time to jump in, I guess. Breathing patterns. There's a breathing pattern. It's prior to passing on. It's called Shane Stokes breathing. And it's spelled Cheyne, Stokes, Stokes breathing pattern. And it was actually discovered by two physicians back in the 1800s. It was Robert Shane and William Stokes back in the 1800s. And it's a breathing pattern. It's an irregular breathing pattern, and that's how I know. I can usually see that really fast. Sometimes it comes on pretty quick, but and it can be short or it could drag out for days. But basically, what you see is an irregular breathing pattern, slow, shallow. There's some pauses for a few seconds to even a minute or so, and then they start back up the breathing again. So it's a breathing pattern that we all recognize in the ICU. And usually we're kind of perceptive to say we know what's coming because the patient is doing that bad that we kind of expect to see that breathing pattern come on. And at that point, we've already had that talk with the family to say your family member is deteriorating in health status, and we probably need to talk about the passing because there's certain things you see. It's not just that. There's other problems. It could be a sepsis infection. It could be pneumonia on top of that, and that could all progress your breathing irregularity. And you used to say that excluding the heart itself, because the heart is the engine of the body, but outside of the heart, every system you add in is 25%, excluding the heart, because if the heart stops, you're dead anyway. But excluding that, 25% mortality for each system that might come into play. So you get a couple of systems in play that aren't the heart, but like three systems, you're looking at a 75% mortality. And usually those systems will then trigger the heart to basically start to become dysfunctional. And then your heart now is into the picture, and then pretty much you're not going to pass. I mean, you're not going to survive. So it's the breathing pattern itself. Shane Stokes breathing pattern is what we look for. And,
okay. We'll come back and talk some more about this with Steve Elkins, radio broadcaster on Republic Broadcasting Network. Steve Elkins is with us, and we're talking about a subject that's uncomfortable, death. And from a medical professional's perspective, and Steve, you talked about the breathing pattern. When you look at all the systems, the circulatory system, the respiration system, the digestive system, those kinds of systems, and you put into the equation this Shane Stokes breathing pattern, how certain are you when you put in all the pieces that death is going to be, a minutes away, hours away, days away? How certain are you?
Very certain. Very certain. Very certain. Been doing it long enough, I could see it. And like I said, everything else kind of leading up to it also. And it's not just like boom, the patient's normal, and then suddenly this breathing pattern comes on. You see you see it kind of progressing in that direction. There's other problems before you get to that problem of Cheyne-Stokes breathing. There's another breathing pattern also. It's called agonal breathing. It's more of a gasping, a struggling for breath, but that's usually associated with brainstem reflex injury or just brainstem reflex, and that's usually caused by a stroke, a cerebral ischemic attack, or a stroke, or a cardiac arrest. But that's a little bit different. That actually is associated when you see a stroke patient or a cardiac arrest, and if they're not doing well, then you may see that. But the Cheyne-Stokes is a little bit different. It's very irregular, and there's no struggling. It's just very irregular. The pattern, if you watch them, take the shallow breath, and then they'll stop, and there'll be a pause, and they'll come back to breathing again. So you kind of see that. What's really disturbing with the breathing pattern, because families see this, they don't know, and with good teaching, you can, like I said, if you start seeing this, or the progression of system failures, and you know this is coming, you probably should have already had this talk with a family, had a family council meeting, and that's what we normally do. We bring everybody together and say, here's where we are. And a good physician will do that, and the nurse usually comes in, maybe even a respiratory therapist will all accompany the family into a room. We'll sit down, and we'll talk about where we are at this point in time. And it's good communication for the family. We need to tell you where we are each and every day. Either we're positives or we're negatives and where we're going. And then we kind of come to a decision, and we make it their decision. It's always their decision of how far we're going to go with this. But I think it's fair and honest to say that when there's no hope or very, very little that you're going to survive, we can keep you alive by technology and machinery and all kinds of stuff, but we'll keep you around. That's quantity, not quality, and eventually you will pass anyway. So, and around the country, it's interesting, Vincent, that wherever I've been around the country as a travel nurse, and I finally stopped in California, I've been all over the country, and I've seen good and I've seen bad in healthcare. But I've seen the family dynamics change around the country. Really interesting wherever you go, how people accept death or they don't accept death. And I think one of the places I was stationed at and did quite a long stint there was in Utah, and I found the family dynamics in Utah to be very, very strong, and families not to be bickering and fighting and squabbling over this and that. When it came down to health issues, they were very sound, that there was usually one person that was the spokesperson for the group, but they were all on the same page, and maybe it's because I was living in an area that was high LDS, Latter-day Saint, Mormon, and they have a different belief in life, life after death, or what happens to you after death. So it wasn't this, oh my gosh, it's over and over, but there's another chapter. So maybe that's what it was. I was really impressed. And then I've been around the country where places where people screaming, hollering, tearing up things. They actually tear up the room, tear up an ER, throw things, punch walls with a family member that's died. It's pretty amazing. You have to call security. But I was really impressed with in Utah, living there for a while and seeing how they actually work together as a family, a unit, and making decisions. But it's pretty certain. Like I said, there's things to look for before you ever see this breathing pattern change of Cheyne-Stokes. And I have to correct myself. I think it was Robert Cheyne. It's actually John Cheyne and William Stokes. I want to correct myself on that. So that's pretty much how that goes.
All right. We'll be right back after these bottom of the hour commercial announcements. Steve, if I get disconnected, please carry on the show while I recall. We're having all kinds of problems with our phone service here. We'll be right back. Class Steve Elkins is with us, and he's a broadcaster on Republic Broadcasting Network. USA Prepares originates on Genesis Communications Network, and it is rebroadcast on Republic Broadcasting Network. So Steve and I are on the same network. I'm just, when I'm there and the rest of the instructors in class are there, we are in rebroadcast mode. So Steve and I know each other. Steve's been to the farm with John Statmiller, and we spent some time together, and we become very close. So, Steve, I want to thank you for your friendship and your wisdom. And we're talking about hospitalization, urgent care, emergency care. And do the families, when they're in this last-minute repair mode for their loved one, why is it that they're bickering? What is there to bicker about?
That's a good question. Everybody, I think these families I find that are bickering or fighting all have a difference of opinion on what is a quality of life. Some may say, well, quality of life would be, okay, I'm okay with living in a nursing home the rest of my life staring at the ceiling. That's quality of life for me, but it's not for somebody else. And so I think there's a difference of opinion on what is quality of life versus what is quantity. And there is something else associated also at the end stages of life in this breathing pattern. We call it the death rattle. And this is really upsetting to see this family sit down at the bedside and they're expecting their family member to pass away, and this death rattle comes on. And what the death rattle is actually is secretions that are piling up in the back of your throat. And you get a gurgling noise, and it's really upsetting. If you didn't know what it was, and I'm kind of used to it, and when I start to hear that come on, I know that, well, first of all, you're not clearing secretions, which means your CO2 level is going to start to climb higher and higher. And if you're not comatose, you probably at that point you are comatose already, and then death is not too far off. So to ease that, to make it not so noticeable, a good nurse or physician would say, call for respiratory therapy, or I do it myself. We have suction in the room, and you simply suction out that stuff in the back of the throat there to kind of clear the airway a little bit better. You are progressing it on, so, actually, if you allowed it to go on and continue the way it was, and it sounds terrible to do that, your just CO2 level will climb high enough until finally you would succumb. But that's a terrible thing to sit there and listen to, and families get very disturbed to hear the death rattle. So I usually clear that out. But along the way, a physician should have already given you orders for comfort care measures. Now, they're comatose, and most likely, unless their brainstem is not functioning, I'm sure it's still functioning. It's just everything else is kind of failing all at the same time, and it's imminent that they're going to pass away. We do a thing called comfort care measures, and we give a little narcotic, not tons of it, just a little bit. And it's a lot of times it's for the family itself to let them know we're taking care of the patient. So if there is any possibility that the person is suffering, even though their eyes aren't open, their level of consciousness has succumbed, but it's that reassurance to the family that you're making sure that they're comfortable. And then, of course, alleviate and get rid of that problem with the death rattle. But with giving the narcotic, what are you doing? You're slowing down respirations even more so, which is increasing your CO2 levels. So you're actually kind of progressing them to move on to the other side, pass on. But it's a comfort care measure thing we do. Like before I said, there's things that will kind of pop up that you should have seen a while back, maybe even a day or so earlier. And another thing is that patients or family members, they kind of focus on that monitor. We have cardiac monitors in the rooms, and if you're in an ICU, you're going to be looking up going, what are those numbers? Well, we have alarms all set, but at that end stage of life, I turn off the alarms for all my numbers, for all my things I'm watching and monitoring, because the monitor's going off, and they're going to go off, is more disturbing on top of hearing the death rattle and all that stuff. So I expect to see that blood pressure start to decrease to a point where my alarm would go off, and like I said, just turn the alarms off. And you'll watch your SpO2 levels go down. That's your oxygenation. And your EKG will be a little erratic. You'll start seeing a bunch of jumping around your heart. Your heart's reacting to not getting enough blood flow, insufficient blood oxygenation. And the breathing irregularities, of course, your temperature is in the hypothalamus in the brain. Of course, everything kind of shuts down. Your temperature goes down. Your circulation, your skin color will change. You'll get a little ashy. Start to, clamp down your extremities. And that's a normal state, actually. Your body does that to maintain blood pressure. It'll clamp down the extremities, a vasoconstriction type effect. and your toes and your feet will start to get colder and colder, and they'll change color. And that's a normal pattern of trying to sustain a blood pressure, but it's not going to last. It's just a last-ditch effort kind of. And most everybody in ICU has a Foley catheter, so you'll see the urine output drop off pretty fast. The kidneys get hit because, well, it's not necessary. Blood flow to the kidneys are shunted away for other areas that are more vital, and the kidneys always get hit. So the urine output would come down or just cease completely. And then you know this is bad. So there's another system right there. Like I said, the 25% rule, not counting the heart, excluding the heart, 25% mortality for each system. So you know, it's that comfort measure thing. And the families, you know, like I said, maybe everybody has a little bit difference of opinion of what is quality and what is quantity. And but in Utah, there was no problem. I never had an issue. They always seemed to understand and accepted it. And they spent that last little bit of time with the family member praying and holding their hand, and all family gathered together, which was really nice. No bickering, no fighting. It was really nice to be there.
Steve, when I lived in Virginia, we got a call that my mom had a brother and a sister. And I got the call from the hospital in Florida that my uncle was about ready to die. So I raced over to my mom and dad's house, which was right next door. We lived on the same farm, 2 houses on the same farm. I raced over and I told my mom what the situation was with her brother, and I said, would you like to go to Florida? We'll pick up your sister. You know, she's 6 hours away. We'll pick her up and race to Florida. Would you like to do that? And she said yes, and that's what we did. And I was talking to the nurse, and then he passed away within 2 days of that phone call. And the nurse, he seemed to be in a coma. He was out, but he was breathing.
Right.
And the nurse said to me, look, it's okay. They don't feel any pain. They just, when they have COPD, they just slip away. Is that right?
Well, I won't say they don't feel pain. I won't say that. He's unconscious. His level of consciousness has changed. He's not awake. He's not alert. I would think, unless there's major brainstem damage or something, if you pinch a nail bed or you do something unpleasant, they're feeling it in there. They're just, it's not maybe not expressive by pulling back and retracting. I never would ever go in that direction to say, oh, they don't feel pain. I think I think you'd never go in that direction. I'm just going to assume there might be, and there's nothing wrong with giving a little something, a supplemental, a little dose of morphine or something, whatever I'm using, or Demerol, and just assure that there is no suffering whatsoever. It's one of the things I'm really keen on, that I just don't want anybody, I don't even want the chance, the possibility of somebody would be struggling into their death or suffering. And people would say, well, you're a Kevorkian. I actually had a nurse, and I got in an argument once, a brand new nurse on the unit, who said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give the morphine. I'm not going to do that. I said, you're required to do so. It's comfort measures. If physician's written the order, it is the right thing to do. And he said, I won't do it. I said, well, you're in the wrong field then. You need to get out of here. And actually, I actually wrote the guy up later on, and he had no business ever being in an ICU. He was a lousy nurse. And he shouldn't even be on a floor. I wouldn't even want him as a floor nurse. So, into that. But, and it's humanity. It's doing the right thing. And I'm not going to look at it as I'm being Kevorkian. I'm simply trying to keep somebody comfortable. And they are going to pass. And like I said, the doses are very small. And it's pretty much on site. If I think I need a little bit more, then I give a little bit more. And I have a philosophy: you can give more, but you can't take away. And it applies to sedation medications. It applies to pain medications. It applies to cardiac medications. And in my training, I've always felt if I can get success with the smallest amount of medication, then I go the smallest route. And I document it, and I tell a physician, you know what? Hey, I want a smaller dose here, and it worked. And this is probably a good thing, because everybody's different, everybody's body's different, chemistry's different. So I like less is okay, and if you need to give more, you can give more, but if you give too much, you can't take it back, and then you can find yourself in a lot of trouble, especially with medications like sedation or pain medication or cardiac medication. So it's a good thing, good policy. I learned that from a friend in early out of school, and he was an excellent ICU nurse. He taught me that, and it's part of my regimen. It's part of what I practice.
Steve, I see people who appear to be pretty close to, my dad's words would be, the end of the line.
Right.
And, that's a railroad term. You're running out of track.
Yeah.
That's the end of the line. And I see people in wheelchairs. I see people on oxygen. I see people with chemical drips to survive. Of all these kinds of maladies, which are among the most pleasant way to expire versus the most difficult, painful, agonizing way to expire based on disease? Is there a chart that this is the worst and this is the most pleasant if you have to reach that end of that line?
Not really, because, like I said, if we're using comfort measures, and at that point in time, the attending would come in and say, here, I've already written the orders for you. We've had the family discussion either as a team with the family, or the physician had the talk with the family. So here, these are the comfort measures. They're already in place. We expect this. We anticipate this, and so there's never a bad death. It's a bad death, but it's not a bad death, and that they're struggling, and it's a traumatic experience to watch it. That is what we try to avoid, to make sure that, and in ICU, you have time to do those things. Now, if somebody's rolling in the ER, and usually family are not allowed in to any of the rooms in the ER because we're working feverishly to get somebody back or, save their lives, there's no witness to seeing what's going on. Now, that would be a traumatic death to watch, because I've seen that, but no families are usually back in there. They're never allowed to go in there. Usually security will stop them, and the team is working on a patient. And so if they were to witness that, that would be very traumatic to watch. That's a bad death.
We're going into a break, and George is calling in from New Hampshire. George will be right with you right after these few short commercial announcements. Class, Steve Elkins is with us, and if you'd like to tune into his broadcast, he's on republicbroadcasting.org Sundays from 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time. That's republicbroadcasting.org, 7 to 9 p.m. on Sundays. The broadcast is called Off the Beaten Path. George in New Hampshire, welcome.
Hi, Vincent, and hello, Steve.
Hello, George.
I have a question. Hi. I have a question where I want to thank you, too, because I know the job you do, it's not only important, but it takes a special breed of person to be able to do that and do it with compassion and proficiency. And like I said, I know I would say the nurses, I would say not anywhere near as appreciated as I believe they should be. The question I have is, I know you've been talking for a little while about people who are basically, for lack of a better term, ready to meet their maker. They're at the end of the line. But what about people who, this is what I witnessed one time. I'm not going to go into detail because of the time aspect, but Steve, I think you've seen it where, in other words, somebody isn't ready at that time, but somebody in the family there is making decisions that they're not going to get certain types of care that might give them a fighting chance to survive, because maybe a decision has been made for whatever reason that somebody else has decided. And I'm talking about someone who's cognizant still, a patient who's cognizant and still. But I'm wondering if you might be able to address some things like that, so some of the people may not find themselves in those positions by maybe signing away certain rights that they may have.
Yeah, you're correct. You're absolutely correct. Hopefully, before you come in the hospital, you've made have some documentation that's all legal. Say what's your request would be for end of life, if that's a possibility. I'm going a blank here on the term itself, the document. I'm going blank on that one, but it's knowledge that you have and your physician who's attending that you have prior to going into the hospital, if that's the situation, or if not, you basically have the document. God, I can't think of the document.
You're talking about the medical directive. Medical directive.
Yeah, that's it. Advanced medical directive. And so you should have that. Anyway, everybody should have that. Everybody should have that. So, and make sure it's on file with the hospital, and make sure it's in your chart on the Cardex. There's a Cardex we have that it pertains to every patient, and it's basically everything about the patient. It's got all kinds of great contact information, who's in charge, a spokesperson, who's the main person you call. You don't call the entire family. Everybody says, well, I want to know. Well, no, you actually have to have one spokesperson that represents the entire family, and the information goes to that person, and there's a code, and it's very secure, so you make sure you're talking to the right person. So you're never in that situation. You should never be. Now, if you ever were, there was no advanced directive orders, that's what we got, advanced directives, that the physician attending would always take the high road to say, you know what, this patient is going to survive or has a good chance, and you're closing the door early. So, on the side of we are going to go further with it, we would actually just say, you know what, we're not going to appease you. We're not going to. And they may get angry about that and want to take legal action or something, but I think in a courtroom, pretty sure the courts would say they would lean on the side of surviving if possible than somebody saying, I'm shutting the door right now, let's get this over with. If there's something to work with, then we work with it, and we will try to, bring the patient back. But there are, like I said, there's a lot of stuff before you get to this Shane Stokes breathing pattern, there's a lot of stuff that has to be factored in, and like I said, it just doesn't appear. I've got number of things I look at, and the progression day after day after day, it kind of goes to a point where you say, we are going in a bad direction. We're not going backwards, and to get back to health, so we now have to start thinking about the other possibility. So I think on the side of saving somebody, we'll go that direction versus shutting the door right away.
May I just say this, is that remember, and I'm saying this to the listening audience, I witnessed this once over 20 years ago. It still bothers me to this day. I came in late in the game, and it was a member by marriage in the family. And let's just say somebody had an agenda where they wanted the fastest way to the assets. And but I saw bits and pieces of it, and I tried to intervene. But because I wasn't a blood relative, I didn't have the say. So just remember that if you look around in your particular family relations and you know there's a certain somebody who's not above such a thing, take every precaution you can not to have them involved or have any kind of a say in fast-tracking you, like Steve said. I appreciate your time, gentlemen. God bless.
Thank you.
George, thank you for being with us today. And Steve, thank you for being with us. It was a difficult subject to listen to and learn from, but it was necessary. See, we'll have to do it again. Thank you for being with us. Class, next hour is the book, the tips from the book. Well, that was fun. 20 seconds before the broadcast started again, about 20 seconds ago, telephone went down, no connection, internet went down. And I mentioned to Jason, I just have this feeling that CenturyLink is going to do this. So I said, if it does, be prepared to run a rebroadcast. So I want to talk about CenturyLink for just a few minutes. I know the answer now. I know the secret, and I'm going to share it with you. But first, let me read something from one of our class members. I don't want to miss this. So I received an email, and it says, Dear Vincent, in response to your question, if your shows on your future book are appreciated, the answer is yes. A couple of weeks ago, my pressure washer was not running well, and I knew it was a fuel problem, but was too busy and did not want to deal with it. I was almost ready to take it to get it repaired when I remembered you said carburetors were a maintenance item, and they were cheap. I would have never known that without hearing it from you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Do not worry about the idiots. They have always been around and just more prevalent now. I can't encourage you enough to keep doing informational shows. I enjoy hearing you talk about ham radios, and my wife and I and our youngest daughter and her husband are going for our technician license so we can communicate when technology fails. Thank you, Brian. Brian, thank you so much. That was very kind of you to say those things. I really appreciate it. It's a nice change from, the regular bashing that the trolls give us. Okay, so back to CenturyLink. Used to be called CenturyLink, then it was called Embark CenturyLink, then it was called CenturyTel. CenturyTel is the phone service provider that we have, and it's the worst in the galaxy. I'm not exaggerating. It used to be that it would go down, every couple of months, then it was every month, and it was a couple times a month. Then it was a couple times a week, and now it's a couple times a day. I'm not exaggerating. And every time it would go down, I would try my best to call the telephone number for CenturyLink that say, hey, it's not working. And they'll go, well, all right, so can you go to your modem? Can you unplug your modem? Wait a minute, replug it in. Yeah. So, over and over and over, hundreds of times over the last 8 years, we've done that. Literally hundreds of times. Multiple hundreds of times. And sometimes it works. That's very, very rarely. Very rare. It doesn't work. So now, in the last few days, we have had a hum on the line. Telephone line. So it makes it difficult to talk to someone. And I was doing the broadcast and I got disconnected. That was Monday. Got disconnected a couple of times since then. I got disconnected about a few minutes ago. And it wasn't working this morning before the broadcast, and miraculously it was working. So it's unpredictable. And I would call this telephone number. You don't need to write this down. You do not need to write it down. 800-201-4099. That's the CenturyLink phone number. For I got a problem or I want to talk, that's the main number. And then you press 1, 2, or 3, talk to someone in the Philippines or in Central America. They try to diagnose your problem, but they're not authorized to do very much. They are authorized to apologize. Well, I thought that my time was worth something. I thought I was paying for something that I should get, but I wasn't getting it. So I asked for a credit. They would say things like, let's see, it's been down for a day. Okay, that's going to be 86 cents. No. You don't understand. I've been on the phone for 45 minutes to get to the point where you're going to tell me 86 cents? No, my time's worth more than that. Well, they would give me like a $5 credit. And then I would push and push. Over the years, I got up to $10 credit every time it went down. Then sometimes I would get $20. Yesterday, I kind of lost my temper. I wasn't yelling and screaming, but I let them know in a very firm way that if they didn't fix our phone service, I was going to the Public Utilities Commission. And I would see what I could do to get CenturyTel, CenturyLink dismantled. They actually believed me. But before I got to that point, I talked to a bunch of people in Central America, the Philippines, and one gal in the United States. And she said, you know what? If you're having a problem, you can always disconnect your service. You can always terminate your service. So their answer was they've got such lousy service, and if I'm not happy with their lousy service, then I should just go away. My point is, I have no choice. There is only one telephone company that I can use. One. I have no choice. It's CenturyLink. Nobody else has telephone service out here. And it's not like that just because we're here. It's rural America is like this. They've got us by the throat. And they would say things over the years like, I see you call a lot. And my response would be, yeah, that's because your phone service doesn't work very often. It's not reliable. It's not consistent. I can't depend on it. And that's why I call you. And I get a message that says, you can contact us via chat, internet chat. Really? I can't do that because the internet doesn't work. So I finally talked to a gal yesterday, and we hit the jackpot. And I'm going to tell you what it is. It is to my disadvantage to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I now know the number that if you have CenturyLink, you don't have to go through all of these prompts to say, yeah, it's my telephone, here's all my credentials on the phone. It takes you right to a department. This is the direct number to take you to the department that's called loyalty and retention. And here's how this works. When I was in the banking world, back in the mid-1980s, I learned from the highest levels of bank management that it cost us about $35 to $45 per new customer. So for if you add up all the money that's spent to get new customers, whether it's advertising or sending things in the mail, you add all that up and you divide it by the number of customers you have acquired. It costs between $35 and $45 each. So it's incumbent upon any company with a brain to say, let's not throw those customers away. They're so darn expensive to get. Three customers cost us $100 to get or more. So some companies have developed these loyalty departments, and they have loyalty discounts. Some have retention departments, and they do what they can to encourage you not to jump ship. Well, the loyalty and retention department of CenturyLink has more tools, more incentives they can offer you to stay with them. I've been with them for 14 years, and they always thank me for my continued payments. They say, thank you for being a loyal customer 14 years. So if you call the number that I'm going to give you, and I want you to write this down, if you have CenturyLink, it doesn't work for anything but CenturyLink. And if you have problems with CenturyLink and you cannot get them resolved to your satisfaction, you can at least get monetary compensation at the tune of $50 per call. So yesterday the internet went down. I called up, bang, $50 credit. Very simple. It didn't take any arguing, it was very simple. I see you have a problem. I see you continue to have a problem. I see you call all the time. Here's $50. Thank you very much. Use this number if you have another problem. So before the broadcast, 8 o'clock this morning, we have a 9 o'clock broadcast. Internet was down. It was down all night. Again. Picked up the phone, called the number, another $50. So now in 2 days, it's $100. And I told them, in no uncertain terms, I am going to keep calling, and it's going to cost them $50 every time the internet fails, or my phone fails, or my phone and the internet fail. I don't have a cell phone. So, here's the number. 866-270-7498. 866-270-7498. That's the loyalty and retention department of CenturyLink. If you have problem after problem and they don't go away, that's the number you call and ask for your $50 credit. Because if you're paying X dollars per month, you should have a really high percentage of uptime, like 99.999% uptime for plain old telephone service. We can't even get that. And when we get hum on the line, The hum is from them. It's not from us. We haven't made any changes. Make sure you're right when you call this number. Don't waste their time. I gave you the back door. This is it. Don't abuse it. Be polite. Be kind. Explain your situation. And they don't want you to leave. They don't. They want to keep you paying every month. But they understand. This is the department that understands how bad their service is. I'm not exaggerating. They have a miserable record. They are one of, if not the worst customer service companies in the United States of America. They have a reputation for not delivering. You can look it up on the internet. I'm not making this up. It's been my experience as well. I'm talking about CenturyLink. And what do they want to do? If you talk to one of the regular people at the regular number, the main number you call for questions or billing problems or something, they want to sell you satellite television. The last thing I would want to do is add more services from a company that can't deliver in the first place. So, one more time, I'll repeat that number. 866-270-7498. Keep a notebook or write on your calendar who you talked with, the time of day and the date, so that you can refer to it when you check your bill and see if that $50 is there. If it's not there, you call them back. And you say, I talked to Joe Dokes at 10:47 a.m. on the 12th of November, or whatever the date is, and say, where's my $50? Can you please make that happen? And, by the way, I had to call you to tell you that you messed up with the first $50 and I want another one. Thank you very much. That's how you do it. That's the secret. It took me 14 years to figure that out. We'll be right back. Okay, so the first tip was how to deal with CenturyLink. Second tip, you know that the Finelli family very rarely goes out to eat because we don't trust the hygiene of the people in the kitchen or the waitstaff. We want to cook it ourselves and make sure that we don't contaminate ourselves with biologicals or chemicals. So for the price of taking a family of 4 to the Olive Garden for a dinner and maybe a dessert and a drink, 4 people, dinner, dessert, and drink, nothing extravagant, I bought a freezer, a used chest freezer. It's 23 cubic feet. It's one of the largest they make. And it's big enough to put a cow in there. So the one I bought was 35 years old or so. Believe it or not, it was a Kenmore, top of the line. And the previous owner must have kept it in the basement. It is spotless. And, of course, I used some chlorine, put it outside, washed it off, scrubbed it out, inside, outside, underneath. It is spotless, as clean as if it were brand new. And I paid $150 for it. Our son picked it up with a pickup truck. It's great. And so we're going to fill it up with one of our cows. We're not going to buy beef that's been injected with all kinds of chemicals and hormones and treated with radiation. We know where our beef comes from. It starts here and ends here on the farm. So for $150, we have this freezer, and we have it on a flat surface. But the problem is, I think I'm going to want to clean underneath it. I'm going to want to wash off behind it and the sides. And if we put a cow in there, the weight of the freezer plus the weight of the cow, it's going to be really heavy. And of course, appliances like refrigerators and freezers and refrigerator-freezer combinations don't typically come with rollers on them anymore. Heck, we're all too lazy to clean under and behind and alongside of our refrigeration equipment. So we don't need any rollers, right? Well, I wanted them. So I found a set of 2,000-pound rated rollers, and I bought them on the internet. You can buy them on eBay. I bought them on eBay and found a really good price on them, like $15. And after about a week, the guy says, something wrong with the product. I refunded your money. I'm waiting, and they don't show up, and then I get a message. So I'm a little terse with my response. Like what? No response. So either he was selling something he didn't have, or he figured he'd get more money for it, or did something. And so I didn't get them. So I ordered them from somebody else, and I paid more for them. I paid about $20. And they have them in different grades. They have them in steel, they have them in plastic, and they have them in aluminum. So if you decide you want to get them, they come in the 1,200-pound rated and 2,000-pound. And it's just a few dollars difference. The low end of pricing is $15. The high end is about $23, shipped. So I bought the 2,000-pound one, and I modified it. I put some oak slats on top of it, and I glued these rollers to the oak boards that I cut for the exact dimensions of the chest freezer. And right after the broadcast, I'm going to set the freezer on these rollers. So here's what happens. I have more clearance underneath, and raise it up maybe 1.5 inches off the floor from where it would be. It's not sitting metal on the floor for rust. And I can roll it in and out to clean behind it. So we have them in our kitchen. We have a freezer in the kitchen, and we have a refrigerator. These two appliances, separate freestanding refrigerator and freezer. Each one of them is set on these rollers. And so when we want to clean it out, we just simply roll the appliance out, clean behind it, vacuum behind it, wipe behind it, push it back in. It's a great way to go. And I've noticed one of the reasons why I did this was I wanted additional air circulation for the compressor and the cooling condenser underneath the refrigerator and freezer. It provides more air, and believe it or not, it seems to me that we're using less electricity with this configuration. So you may want to consider that for yourselves. We'll be right back, and I'll give you some more tips. So, class, these are not surviving the apocalypse tips. These are just things that we do here at the farm. Hamburger patties. Now, not all of you are going to be able to raise your own beef. So if you buy ground beef and from a place that you trust, and you make hamburgers with them, or if you buy pre-shaped hamburgers, we don't do that. We've never done that. My mom didn't do it either. What we would do is we would buy the beef, and I suggest that you consider buying it in the 5-pound trays if you're going to buy beef. And if you're going to make hamburgers, it's really easy, and this is the way we do it. We'll wear some food service type gloves, buy the beef on sale, and then have at the ready BPA-free Ziploc freezer bags in the sandwich size and the gallon size. So we would take a clump of meat, about 1/4 pound, because I don't like thick hamburgers. Some people do. I like them really thin. Kind of like the way McDonald's sizes theirs. That's what I like if I'm going to have a hamburger. So if I'm making them, I take about 1/4 pound and I put it into one of these BPA-free Ziploc bags. And I'll drop it into the corner of the bag. Then I will use the bag to flatten out that hamburger meat so it's really thin in the bag. And it's not really critical to make it a round hamburger. Sometimes they're, kind of squarish. Sometimes they're a regular shape. I'll just put them in there, and on the clean countertop, sterilized countertop, the meat will be in the bag, and I'll just squish it with my hand on the outside of the bag, and I'll flatten it really thin, squeeze the air out of the Ziploc bag, and zip it. And I'll put it flat on the counter. I'll do the next one. So each hamburger is formed not outside the bag, it's formed inside the baggie. Then when I have enough of them, I'll put them flat inside the gallon freezer bag, squeeze the air out, mark it with a Sharpie as to the date and what it is, and in the freezer it goes. So what you'll end up doing is you'll see the quality of the meat. You will make it yourself. You'll save a lot of money, probably about half by the time you're done, or almost half. And that's the way you'll probably do it from now on. And it absolutely, positively works. So that's making your own hamburger patties. You do not have to buy them in discs from the meat department at that store where you buy them. Let's talk about ceiling fans. I don't think I have ever been in anybody's house yet, anyone else's house, where if they turn on the ceiling fan, it doesn't wobble. Now, why is that? Why do they all wobble? Well, they wobble because they're not balanced. When you buy a brand new ceiling fan, it comes with a toolkit to balance the fan. It comes with this little plastic, specifically weighted clip, kind of like a clothespin, but much, much shorter, maybe 1/3 the length of a clothespin, maybe 1/4 the length. It's a little plastic clip that is specially designed to fit on the edge of the blades of your ceiling fan. And what you do is when you install the fan, you put this clip, first you start it and you see if it wobbles. If it wobbles, then you take this clip and you put it on the middle of one blade and you see if it gets better or worse. And it's trial and error. Believe it or not, it's absolutely trial and error. There's no better formula that I have to other than what I'm telling you. So if it gets better, then you might try moving that clip a little bit inward toward the center of the fan, meaning the motor. If it gets worse, you move it outward. And you move it in or out until it gets better, better, better. But you might not have the right blade. It may be a 4-blade or 3-blade or 5-blade fan. So you'll have to try different blades. But eventually, you will get to the point where it has no wobble at all. And you want to find that on high speed. Okay? So it might take two people. It might take you on the ladder and someone else at the switch to power it on and power it off. So you can say, now, power it off. And let me try moving this weight. Once you get that clip, that weight clip in the right spot, the right distance from the center of the fan, you can then take this lead weight, and there are probably 2 of them in the package, and you can put that lead weight exactly in the center of the blade on the upper side, not the bottom, because you want to look at this lead weight, and it usually has an adhesive self-stick. And what I do is before I permanently affix it, I will take some electrical tape, and I will use the minimum amount of electrical tape to secure temporarily that lead weight on the fan blade. And I'll test it again. And if I've got it right, then we shut it off, shut the fan off, and then permanently apply that lead weight to the upper side where we have determined with that temporary weight clip that the weight should be. And what you'll find out is you'll have one of the very few ceiling fans that doesn't wobble. Everyone else's does. Everyone. And another thing about ceiling fans, and I've mentioned this before, but I want to repeat it again because it's critical. I don't know of anyone who has mounted a ceiling fan properly. Ceiling fans are not to be mounted in a standard plastic ceiling box. The ceiling boxes are meant for very lightweight ceiling fixtures, very lightweight ceiling fixtures. So if you have a chandelier, typically you have to have a special box that's made of metal that can support the weight of your brass chandelier or your leaded brass chandelier or your heavy chandelier or your ceiling fan. And what we do, I just installed one in a bedroom after 14 years. I finally got the bedroom finished. Mrs. Finelli and our son, all of us worked on it. took probably 9 weeks now to spackle and sand and finish and paint, prime and paint this bedroom. I used a 2x6 lumber to support the ceiling fan, 2x6. And it is screwed and lag bolted into the beams because I want to make sure that this thing does not come down. And I did something that our son walked into the bedroom and he said, it really looks kind of odd because you don't have the ceiling fan in the center of the bedroom. And I said, right. And the reason I did that was because if it comes down, if we have an earthquake, if we have whatever, I don't want that thing landing on me when I'm sleeping or Mrs. Finelli. So it's offset. And I could do that because our house has, beams. And I could mount it. And there is a spot in the center of the bedroom. There's like 5 beams in the bedroom. And there's one right in the center. But what I did was I took a 2x6 and I lag bolted it on top of 2 beams so that the fan is mounted to that. And that is not in the center of the room. So if the fan falls down, it's probably just going to land on the floor. But I don't think it's going to fall down because normally you mount these fans with 2 or 4 screws. I use 7. So I am not going to trust our lives to some foreign company. And I believe all of the fans, or almost all the fans, are made in Asia. Of the fans that I have looked at, I think the best that I have seen, I have not seen them all, but the best that I have seen are manufactured by the Hunter Company, the Hunter Fan Company. I think they're the best. They actually balance. They don't wobble. The one that I bought for our house, I believe, has been discontinued. It's called Silent Breeze. I had to buy the last 2 of them used on eBay because I think they stopped making them. And the new ones that they make, I think, are ugly. So I'm not going to put something that I think is ugly in my house and have to look at it all the time. I know that the bearings are really good on this particular model. I know that they are actually silent, and they're 3 speeds, so low, medium, and high. And there's a switch to reverse the direction of the fan so that you can have it set for summer or winter. And then, of course, the fan is so high up, I used a 3/4 inch piece of black pipe. Black pipe is used typically for gas, like natural gas or propane. So I used that. It's a real heavy 18-inch piece of pipe. I painted it with primer and black paint, so it looks just like a piece of black pipe, and it really does not stand out. And when you tighten these pipes, as they're called down rods, I use 2 pipe wrenches, and I make sure that those darn things are not going to unscrew and have the fan drop on anybody. So those are I have another thought about ceiling fans. The way they're designed is to work on 1 light switch. I think that's nuts. So, for example, some people like to have the fan and light because they're going to replace that ceiling fixture or that ceiling light with a ceiling fan with a light. So there's typically 1 light switch in the wall for that. Well, when I built our house, I didn't like that idea. I wanted 1 switch for the fan and 1 switch for the overhead lighting. Every room in our house has overhead lighting. And all the overhead lighting for each room is on a separate circuit. So, for example, the kitchen, all the kitchen lights are on a separate circuit for the kitchen overhead lights. Dining room, there's two fixtures in the dining room. And those 2 chandeliers, hanging chandeliers, they're very plain, by the way. They're not anything extravagant. They are on a separate circuit. The living room, overhead lighting on a separate circuit. And the reason for that is at any time, if I wanted to convert those overhead light circuits to off-grid, I could do that. That's when we built the house. But now we're off-grid anyway, so it doesn't matter. But if you are building a house, I suggest that you make your lighting circuits separate. Maybe even put them in a separate sub-panel so that if you want to have emergency lighting with an inverter or a generator or whatever your emergency power generation system is, you probably want lighting to be available. So if you have LED lighting and it's not consuming a lot of watts, you could have that emergency lighting at the flick of a switch, rather than those who say, hey, where's the flashlight? Oh, the batteries are dead. Where are the matches? I want to get, and where are the candles anyway? And where's the kerosene for the kerosene lamp? Where's all that stuff? Well, you don't have to have that if you have your emergency lighting already wired, ready to go. And we do. We have 12-volt lighting in the kitchen, and it's at the ready. All I do is flip a switch. It's hooked up to a 12-volt battery source. Class, absolutely amazing. The internet and telephone both went off 3 times during the broadcast. And just as I finished the last word in the last segment, the internet and telephone got disconnected. So I'm waiting for the technician to be here. He should be here in a few minutes. Kyle in Montana, welcome.
Good morning, Vince. You know, I totally agree with everything you're saying. I just had a couple of thoughts that maybe people would really want to think about. If you're going to put in separate systems, like off of a different sub-panel, I highly suggest you get an electrician, and you keep, or if you're going to do it, you keep those things separate and make sure you mark them so that you know which one goes where. Because if you get them things confused and start and make a mistake, it could burn your house down. That's a. But I totally understand.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I just throw that out there as a cautionary.
You're absolutely
thing.
right. And
go ahead,
Kyle. You're an electrician, and I have recommended I believe the finest book available on wiring your home, which is a Black & Decker book, and it's available on the internet very inexpensively. You can get it used on eBay or Amazon. I suggest you get the Black & Decker complete book on home wiring to learn about this class, and make sure you know what you're doing before you do it, as Kyle said. Kyle, have you ever seen anybody's house other than yours that was wired properly? Have you seen one?
Well, I wired a lot of houses, Vince. And so, yes, I've done.
I'm not
really
talking about.
That yeah, I got you. Yes, I have seen some. There are some really good electricians where I live around here that do a really good job. I have. But it's really funny you mentioned the light and the fan being on separate switches because most everybody will just wire one switch to do that, and then you'll climb up there and put on which one you want. But every house that I ever wired, I would ask the people, do you want this fan and this light on separate switches? Oh, yeah. They never even thought about it. Even though it's hanging down, they could just reach up and get it, even on a low ceiling. But they just, nobody ever thinks about that. But I had one quick thing. I know we're really getting close. So, folks, here's a little deal that might save you a little bit of money. I use like a little tiny 8-inch fan that sits on the other side of my wood stove that blows across the wood stove. Well, it was getting to the point to where it wouldn't turn. It was down. Well, I know they don't use real good bearings in these things, so I took it completely apart. And there's a little bushing on the back, and there's a little bushing on the front that supports the shaft that turns in this thing. And if you will take the motor out of it and take those 2 little brackets off, put a little tiny bit of really high-quality synthetic motor oil, just a drop on those bushings, and reassemble everything. Make sure, of course, that it's unplugged before you do anything, but put just a drop on that. It'll usually last another year, and then you can do it again, and you'll get another year out of it. I do it almost every fall coming into the wood stove season. Take it apart, put 1 little tiny drop of synthetic motor oil on those 2 little bushings, and it goes for a whole another year, and I paid $1 for it at a garage sale, and it's been 3 years now. So anyway, that's just another little tip for people.
You're absolutely right. I do the same thing. As a matter of fact, class, here's another tip to add on to that. There was a place that I could not easily get to where the bearings were, and I wanted to put a drop of oil on that bearing, as Kyle talked about. So what I did was I took a piece of wire that I could bend, and I'm talking about thin wire, maybe 18 gauge or 18 gauge aluminum wire or steel or copper, doesn't matter. And I bent it so that I could touch the bearing with the end of this wire. So I dipped the wire into the oil and turned the wire upside down so the oil would travel toward my hand. Then I would tip it so that I could touch the bearing, and the oil would travel down the piece of wire onto the bearing that I could not reach. Because there are bearings that if you try to drop a drop of oil out of an oil can, you can't hit it because there's parts in the way. Well, this will let the oil travel a curve because it will adhere to the wire while it slides, that drop slides down the wire. And so Kyle's absolutely right. And there's another fan that can benefit from that, and that would be the bathroom fan. If you turn on your bathroom fan, it goes, makes a noise like that, or doesn't spin at all. Almost every time, probably 99.999% of the time, you can fix that with 2 drops of oil, one on either end of the motor shaft.
Yep.
Kyle, have you done that?
Exactly. You know, the other thing that really is good is if you've got a needle that is dedicated to this and you actually keep it in a place where the needle ain't going to get broke. I have bent needles just a little bit, and sometimes you can just use that and twist it around to get down to those little tiny hard-to-reach areas, and you can squeeze out a drop.
There you go. There you go. And, we actually have hypodermic needles that when we use them for the animals, we throw away the needle but keep the syringe. And we can put oil in that or grease and use that for lubricating parts on the farm. And by the way, it's legal. It's legal to have hypodermics if you're a farmer. Nobody even questions it, but be careful. Be careful you don't stick yourself. Okay, Kyle, thanks so much for being with us.